All right. Hello, everyone joining us tonight. Thank you all for tuning in via Zoom on this Friday night. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight for this fabulous book, Everything Harder Than Everyone Else by Jenny Valentish. Before we jump into things, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of which I'm currently on, the Yagara and Turrbal people, as well as the traditional owners of the lands on which you're all joining us from around Australia. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. For our audience tonight, you will be muted for the session, but if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. Once I finish up with my introduction here, I will send you through a link where you can buy the book, and that will also show you how to use the chat function, which will be very important for our Q&A, which will take place at about 7:15, 7:20. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box and then I will pass them along. Now, in conversation with Jenny tonight, we have Brigid Delaney. Brigid is a senior writer for Guardian Australia and the author of Wellmania, This Restless Life and Wild Things. Brigid and Jenny are both early readers of each other's works and live in the same town in central Victoria. Brigid also had to talk Jenny out of being waterboarded during her research for this book. Over to you, Brigid.
Thank you so much. So Jenny, this is Jenny's third book. The first one is Your Mother Would Be Proud, True Tales of Mayhem and Misadventure. The second one was the novel Cherry Bomb, and the third was Woman of Substances. And I got to know Jenny, I moved to a town called Castlemaine in probably 5 years ago, and we were introduced by Benjamin Law, who said, you've got to meet this fabulous writer called Jenny Valentish. And Jenny was doing Woman of Substances and I was doing a book called Wellmania. And in a way, there were two opposite ends of a spectrum. One was the wellness industry and the other one was addiction. And it's been really interesting seeing over the last 5 years, Jenny go from Woman of Substances, which is a book that is in some respects harrowing, but it's very serious and like really changes the conversation around, you know, models of treating addiction and women's experiences with addiction to Everything Harder Than Everyone Else, which is her current book, which I just read as a most kind of joyful exploration of things that a lot of us are really scared of, things that might seem violent or repulsive or weird or terrifying. Jenny has just jumped straight in, and it's a non-fiction book that's reported, it's interviews with various practitioners of extreme, not just sports, but also sex and pursuits like eating, like cannibalism. So you'd expect that this book would be quite serious and maybe a little bit judgmental, but it's an absolute pleasure to read. And I can tell that Jenny has had an extremely fun time writing and researching this book. Would that be the case, Jenny?
Yeah, and I'm in no position to judge anyone. But yeah, you can tell just from the title, Everything Harder Than Everyone Else, the tone is very different to Women of Substances. And that's a title that was ripped off Motorhead, by the way. They had an album, Everything Louder Than Everyone Else. But there were some themes from the last book that are carried over to this one, but they're just explored in a different way, like impulsivity and sensation seeking and endurance. I was thinking about the fact that people who take a lot of drugs, sometimes they're really exploring how far they can push their body, and it's almost like a quest, a mission. And weirdly, there's quite a crossover from heavy drug use to things like ultra running, long distance running, marathon running. When people quit one, they can sort of leap into the other. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like, okay, well, that means there's this kind of energy or drive that existed before in these drug using years. And if you stop the behavior, the drug use, that still needs to go somewhere. And so it goes boom, into this quite extreme sort of sport. And so I wanted to look at other pursuits as well as running and see
Can you name a few of those?
Mm-hmm.
Can you name a few of those things that you?
Yeah, so bodybuilding, ballet, because you know ballet is so excruciatingly tough on the body. It involves huge sacrifices. Wrestling, bare knuckle boxing and fighting generally, performance art, all things that really push the body way past the safety level, you know, like they might cause long-term damage. And I just thought, I'd like to talk to people who do these different things and find out, are there sort of commonalities that cross them all, but also did certain pursuits attract certain people with certain histories and that kind of thing. So that was the initial quite vague quest.
So I'll read out a bit from page 247. So I thought it was very in keeping with your nonconformist personality to put the reason you did the book at the end of the book rather than the start. I thought that was great for people to have their own journey with it and then get to the end and go, okay, this is why you did the book. But I'm going to read it out now, which is, I'd had an idea kicking around the back of my mind about profiling the all or nothingers, the void chasers, the death wishers, the hell for leatherers, the up the anteers, and okay, the distractors. I didn't want to pathologize them either. I wanted to celebrate them. These people who don't know when to stop, they're my people. Some flog their reward pathways like dopamine jockeys. Others careen towards injury because of an unwillingness to slow their pace. Some goad themselves onto ever greater heights or more depraved depths. Some explore new frontiers of physical pain as a form of self-flagellation. Some have knitted their identities so tightly to their pursuit that they risk tumbling into abyss if it's taken away. What makes them your people?
All of that you just said.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of upping the ante in particular, you know, of always needing to go one harder and always needing to push things a little bit further, of thinking you have your limit, your hard limit, and then having reached it, moving it. Sensation seeking, people who use their past as grist for the mill. I mean, I've certainly obviously done that by writing an addiction memoir. But also people who are very productive, like who project manage their way out of some kind of, you know, crisis. So I thought that, you know, these are all people who've got a certain kind of maybe natural born agitation and restlessness. And I think they're all finding super productive, interesting ways of dealing with it. Other people might pathologize a bit more. And certainly I've done some radio interviews already where I can tell the general kind of tone from the interviewer is, what's wrong with these people? And I don't think there's things wrong with them. You know, I think these are the kinds of people who used to have songs written about them, you know. I actually went to this library in London, I've forgotten what it's called actually, but it has like a section of old like country songs and old folk songs and broadsheets they were called, and it's all about boxers and pugilists and prostitutes, and you know, they weren't pathologized. It was like, what are they up to now then? You know.
Yeah.
So I wanted to celebrate these people and hear from them.
So in celebrating them, because a lot of them might be used to being, I guess, demonized or cast in a certain light by journalists, how hard was it to get trust and convince them of this project?
Pretty hard, especially when you're talking about sports people, because as you'll know as a journalist, it's really easy to get hold of any kind of artist, creative person. They might have a publicist, or you just approach them one-to-one and they're like, yes, I would like to publicize my thing. Athletes don't come from that kind of mindset, you know. They're first of all, they probably have gatekeepers like agents rather than publicists, but also they're not really encouraged to share their internal thoughts with the media at all. It's more about your performance.
Why do you think they're encouraged not to? Because, like, as a writer, you're asked all the time what your pain is or what your, you know.
But it's probably not helpful for an athlete to be encouraged as thinking about themselves as being vulnerable. You know, that they go to sports psychologists all the time, and that's to bring out their confidence and that kind of thing. So to have someone sit down and go to your pain points and talk about your childhood and what you do with your anxiety, athletes tend to do it more after they've retired, really.
So at what point what did you think was helpful for drawing that stuff out of your subjects? Was it your personality, the fact that you are athletic and that you do partake in competitive sport, or do you think it was the journalist aspect? Like, what was it that got you over the line with these subjects?
Playing down the journalist bit more. Well, yeah. I have written about these kind of areas before, so I could maybe send them a link to something I've written before, which shows I would be sympathetic to this. I understand your pursuit. Women of Substances is quite a good calling card in that respect, because I've written about things that are, tricky and traumatic and nuanced. But also, yeah, I definitely said in every single email that I do Muay Thai, feeling a bit kind of sheepish, like you're showing off, but actually to try and explain that, I train 6 days a week, not on your level, but it is my number one priority, and I understand what that's like, and this is why I'm interested. Like, there was one interviewee, a bare knuckle boxer from Vegas, who is I think she's the lightweight champion of the world. Her name's Christine Ferreira. And she got back to me immediately when I emailed her. But she said, she wanted to know, who are you? Why are you interested? What's your interest in combat sports? It was like she was studying me like she'd have to study an opponent, like she has to get in her opponent's heads all the time. And she wanted to be very sure who I was, what my weaknesses were, and what my strengths were.
Like being in the ring.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I mean, the extreme kind of element is the thing that links to your interviewees. Do you want to maybe tell us about one or two of your favorite subjects? I know they're probably like children and you can't pick a favorite, but like one or two of your favorite subjects and what a lot of them might have had in common or how they differed.
So I had, there was Sir James, who is a male dominant, and I actually had booked an appointment with him because I thought, I'm going to buy myself a Christmas present. And then I was like, hang on.
Do you want to explain male dominant for those of us not versed in?
Yeah, so it's like a dominatrix, but male. Mm-hmm. So somebody who works in a dungeon and is dominant. So I thought, well, I could claim this back. What am I thinking? So I interviewed him, and he was really interesting because he had a slightly different perspective, because he's not the person who's putting their body through it. He is the person who facilitates that for other people. So it's quite interesting getting that flip side of it. And he was talking about how people who come to him and want to be the most used or endure the most beatings makes them feel like they can handle anything in their day-to-day life. Like, now any kind of quibble they're having at work or at home, they can privately think to themselves, yes, but I can withstand this. And this is what I heard from a lot of my interviewees, actually. There was Courtney Olson, a bodybuilder and the head of Girl Clothing, GRRL, who has the world's deadliest thighs, and she smashes watermelons and is so larger than life. She's awesome. And I first heard of her when it was a few years ago. She was in the tabloids all the time because she'd married the head of the Gold Coast rugby team. And they'd got wind of the fact that she used to do muscle fetish, which is basically men would pay her to just sort of like crush them between her legs, no sex, or carry them on her shoulders. So they got wind of that, and so they were basically saying that she was a porn star and all this kind of thing. And I remember reading all that and thinking, oh, she sounds interesting, and browsing her Instagram for quite a few years before we finally made contact.
And what was she like in real life?
I have such respect for bodybuilders now. I mean, I was guilty of some misconceptions, like it's all pure vanity, but they're so focused and so busy and have a million projects going on, and their entire day is just mercilessly scheduled. And it's all about, you know, counting your macros and your micros and meal prep and this, that, and the other. And so she's like the busiest person I've ever met. And I think bodybuilders do tend to have this quite chaotic upbringing. I shadowed two and they both did, but having read more broadly than that seems to be a common thing, where you have very inconsistent parenting. So you never know what to expect next from your parents, whether they're taking drugs or they're just not around very much. And so they're, you know, when they're older, they really crave routine, having probably gone through their 20s and possibly 30s of chaos. They discover this pursuit, which is all so, it brings such relief in its sense of order. And I could really relate to that. And my life used to be really chaotic. And now, like, if I can't have my morning bone broth and hot lemon and these stupid routines, I'm like, oh. So yeah, I totally understand.
What do you think that is?
It's just a sense of grounding yourself, I think. Like, I love going to the gym wherever I travel, because you can just go into a gym and you've got all the same weights there no matter what city you're in. And it's like, okay, this kind of assuages any anxiety I have of being restless and then in limbo, you know?
So I wonder, just on that point, do you think the routine then allows people to be extreme? So if people feel safe in an environment where they're, you know, the gym's the same, the trainer's the same, the food's the same, they're then able to take possibly for like more extravagant risks because they've got a basis where they feel solid.
Yeah, I mean, everyone I spoke to has their own form of risk assessment, and they probably have some kind of, a trainer or mentor or someone like that. Nothing's done in a chaotic or flippant way. So yeah, you could be right there.
What was the aspect of, or what kind of area of risk taking did you feel most kind of freaked out by or most alien to you?
I think the interviewee who is causing the most conversation so far amongst people who've read the book is this scientist called Dr. Jack Aloka. He's this quite young Italian guy. I mean, he's probably 35. Has been working out of Melbourne University on machine learning around sleep. But that's what he does for his career. He also has this personal mission of basically eating as many species and things that a lot of people would consider to be inedible as possible. And he does that for multiple reasons. He does that to challenge our morals and ethics around food. He's eaten some endangered species, but he's also done that by meeting the tribes that hunt them and have done forever and spending time with them, you know. And so his argument is like, is that worse than just buying factory farmed meat that you can't even tell what it is really from a supermarket? But he also did some really out there things, like he went to Papua New Guinea and he was hanging out with a tribe there who he literally just met. And he decided to take Brumansia, which is known as angel's trumpet, a really, really strong psychedelic that can make you very sick. And so, you know, I was talking to him about his fear of death. I was like, have you got a really underactive amygdala or something? And he just thinks that while you're alive, and you have to have these experiences. And no, he doesn't think about death. But he does these things where he is putting himself into a lot of danger. And there is, I suppose, quite a lot of ego involved, and being able to have an incredible story at the end of it. But he's never going to settle down. And he uses these missions as a gateway to meet people and to travel. And so it's all really interesting.
But he did something. I mean, do you want to share what he did? This was that there's a lot of kind of there's a lot of stuff in the book that where my eyebrows were kind of the top of my head. I was like, wow. a lot of this stuff's really extreme, but he took the cake. And do you want to talk about what he did that was
the human cake?
The human cake.
Yeah, well, he was hoping to, I don't know how much really planning he'd put into this, but he was hoping to eat human while he was in Papua New Guinea, which didn't happen, but he ended up doing it in Melbourne. He ended up eating a part of his flatmate's finger, which is actually quite interesting because it's the only thing he's eaten where he had consent, if you think about it.
And it's not illegal, is it?
No, it's not illegal. As he came to Castlemaine and I was interviewing him, and he's really loud, and we were sitting in this cafe and he's booming on about cannibalism is legal in Australia. I was like, oh, God, yeah, so he did that, and it kind of went horribly wrong because he got consent to do it, but he wound up falling out with the person whose finger it was because after a few drinks he kept bragging about it, not very scientifically, and it got back to the guy's family, and yeah, all caused a bit of hoo-ha. Hoo-ha's got a different meaning over here, isn't it?
What has?
Hoo-ha, doesn't matter.
Woo-woo. And this, I guess, did he get what he wanted out of that experience? Like, do people, when they do these extreme experiences, is it for the experience itself, or is there kind of an end? Like, is there a reason? Like, was there a reason he wanted to eat flesh?
He's always on this kind of push-pull between loving notoriety and detesting it. So, I mean, he doesn't, for instance, he doesn't kind of brag about these kind of things on social media, but at the same time, he is kind of dying for people to know. So he was documenting all his trips, and I imagine that he's going to do something with that footage. What is really interesting is he gets paid a ton and flown around the world to give talks to squillionaires, entrepreneurs, on private islands, at conferences. Like last time I spoke to him, he got paid 10 grand to go and give a talk somewhere in the States. He's been flying all through the pandemic. He actually contracted COVID, which, being Jack, he was quite thrilled about. So yeah, there is this kind of hating and loving notoriety and publicity at the same time.
So I guess like that to me is the definition of extreme. But like, did your definition of what extreme is change over the course of doing this book? And did the people that you interviewed, did their lives that would seem extreme to outsiders were actually quite normalized for them, so it didn't feel extreme? Like, how does that play out?
I didn't really feel shocked by anything because as the journalist who's got this overarching project in mind, I'm just looking for patterns, you know? So I'm looking for echoes that somebody else, of something that somebody else I spoke to has said, or things that are complete opposites. So I'm more sort of mapping things out like a constellation than thinking, you know, that's horrific, I can't believe that.
It seemed like the constellation lit up a universe that a lot of people don't ever get to see, which I think is the great gift of this book, is that it maps with a great deal of respect and care and also humor and joy, subcultures that are hidden from a lot of people. And I think that's the kind of the brilliance of this book. Like, were you aware when you were mapping these patterns that that maybe these people had always been othered, so their lives hadn't necessarily been celebrated in the way that you were going to celebrate them?
I think, within their own communities, they are big fish, right? They are known, they are outliers. One person who was really interesting was Charlie Engel, who's this world famous ultra runner. World famous if you're aware of ultra running.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. He's had a documentary made about him. He's written a memoir, and he's about 60 now. And ultra running is the thing that absolutely destroys your body more than anything else. And it's all about suffering. But
why does it destroy your body? Like, what's ultra running?
He might run for 4 days across the Sahara.
Oh my God.
Often they involve triathlons, actually, so it's more like an ultra kind of adventure race. People's tongues fall apart. people's feet fall apart, they're dehydrated, atrophied limbs, permanent damage sometimes. And it's, the races have names like Hurt 100 and Triple Brutal Extreme, and that's part of the appeal to them. And the marketing really taps into that concept of suffering, and cycling, endurance cycling in particular, has a lot of language around suffering. There's a book, Into the Suffersphere. There's the app, the Sufferfest, and that is what sort of reels people in. It's kind of this self-flagellation, if you like. But Charlie was saying he used to smoke a lot of crack in his younger days, and got into a fair bit of trouble with his car being shot at by dealers and all that kind of thing. And as I said, he's this real affable, healthy guy now. And he said, to be honest with you, there's not a lot of difference between the sort of validation I get from people when I say I'm about to do this race across the desert that's going to last 3 weeks. There's not a lot of difference between that and when I used to buy crack from homeless people, and they'd say, steady on, you're not going to smoke that much, are you? And they probably didn't phrase it like that, but that same sense of, whoo, man, you go too far. He loves that.
Yeah. In the porn chapter, there was a bit of, there was questioning about when does extreme become exploitation? Like when does someone doing something extreme and that no one else would do, when does that actually cross the line into degradation? You know what I mean? So yeah, did that come up a bit, like about agency?
Yeah, so in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, there was a real kind of trend in porn where it was record-breaking feats. And people would make an awful lot of money, and they would get very famous. Think what you like about that, but things have changed very much now, where it's like almost like factory farming. It's just people are just churned out, young girls. If they make more than a couple of movies, they're kind of considered done. And so, but they're kind of expected to do these same extreme feats that these outliers did back then, but now without any of the glory, if you like. It's just now that's what the public expects. And so they're really lambs to the slaughter, some of them. You can tell if you watch something that they're not expecting this wasn't what they signed up for. So yeah, the extreme endurance can have an exploitation aspect, but I only really saw that in pornography.
And there's a big gonzo element in this book, which at the end of the book, you have an actual professional fight or amateur fight. So being in the book, like how important was it to you to actually be sort of almost like a character in it, or have your own experiences?
I do think that writing with a personal element is the best writing in terms of its actually best quality. I actually did a memoir writing workshop for Avid Reader, and I absolutely love teaching first person writing, and I love hearing people's stories. It's a real privilege. So I think it brings an extra element to writing. This book certainly could have done without me in it. It would have still worked, but I like the fact that there was this parallel mission going on where around the beginning of me writing the book, I started training in Muay Thai, and then I had an amateur fight at the end of it under the lovely chandeliers of the Melbourne Pavilion in front of a page.
And Jen, tell them who your first opponent was in kickboxing.
I don't know. Who do you mean?
It was me. We had Jenny and I had our it was, I think, both our first time kickboxing. It was about 3 or 4 years
lesson, you weren't my opponent. You were holding a pad.
I never went back, and Jenny went on to become a professional fighter and write a book. So yeah, one of us is extreme, the other one is very not so great. But so your own journey. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so each chapter, as well as following a different pursuit, also has a bit of a different theme, which I found is usually related to that pursuit. So I wrote myself into a chapter about fighting, and the theme was ego and anger, and do they have a role in fighting? And so, I mean, I'm 46 and I've been a freelance journalist for a while and an editor before that. I'm not used to people telling me what to do. I'm used to thinking independently and not having to consult on any decision making. So this was a huge culture shock for a start, just because of that. But then also, you know, you might assume that learning to fight gives you a sense of power and invincibility, but that comes much later. Like for the first few years, it's actually constant humiliation and feeling frustrated. And, you know, the role of ego and anger is to cover up any other emotion that we have. So anything like feeling vulnerable or humiliated, we cover up, some of us, with anger and ego. So basically this chapter became a bit of my battle with those things while learning to fight, and trying to figure out from established fighters, did they have like a certain temperament to start with, or did they have these qualities knocked out of them?
So if someone in their 40s wants to go from zero to hero and learn how to fight, like what was the actual process for you?
I didn't do this, but there are literally courses called From Zero to Hero.
Oh, okay.
You can go to fight gyms and they have like pretender to contender and whimper to warrior. And they'll get you fighting someone of your level within, could be anything like 6 weeks to 6 months. But I did it the traditional way. And what was the question? How do you do it?
Yeah, how do you do it? Like, if you decide, like, it feels about as remote as like walking on the moon. Like if you just suddenly wake up one day in your 40s and think, I want to be a fighter, like.
It probably requires a certain, it requires certain personality traits, doesn't it? And I was tapping into this long dormant sense of competition that I used to have as a kid. I was fiercely competitive, and aggression. These things that you have been taught, especially as women, to dampen down. In fact, I remember probably about 6 years ago, I went for a job interview for an editor of this place that was known for having a high staff turnover. And I had to do the psychometric HR test and I failed. And the person who had wanted me to join the company said, it was because you weren't competitive enough. They want really cutthroat people there. But I found that when I started training, you're allowed, it's like sanctioned competition, sanctioned aggression. You're allowed to feel those things. And it didn't take long for it to just go, but in a more positive way than before, you know. And you feel this real sense of power when you're looking into the eyes of your opponent and you can see them flagging and you can see the fatigue, and it makes you grow a lot stronger. And then of course the flip side is next time that's you and you're the one who's landing on their ass.
I mean, there's a big legacy of Gonzo journalism, but it's usually like the big names are men. Like there's obviously Hunter S. Thompson, Louis Theroux, John Ronson. Like, do you feel like that there's more women are getting into it, and it's a great field for women, or is it a style that you think really like readers respond to? So, talk a bit about being a female Gonzo journalist.
I think more women are getting into it. There's Dawn Porter in the UK, and there's somebody else who's doing loads and loads of great documentary work. At the moment, I'm reading this.
That's a great book.
Yeah, by Barbara, let me pronounce this right, Erin Reich. I didn't.
Yeah.
And she's done that for decades, and proper immersion journalism, where she's totally, like in this one, she does minimum wage jobs, a whole series of them for months and months at a time. That's a bit different to me doing things in my book, like going to a fetish dungeon. It's more hardcore. But I don't know, maybe it's been more of a male pursuit up to this point, because traditionally men have been sort of maybe have felt more confident with the sound of their own voice and inserting themselves in things. I mean, that's just a theory, because I can't think why not otherwise.
Yeah. Were there any, because a woman of substances, there's a lot of vulnerability of kind of low moments, whereas this book, it's a lot more, doesn't feel as vulnerable, and it also feels like there's a lot of triumph throughout, even, you know, spoiler alert, you didn't win the fight. You know, were you conscious of shifting register as a writer with this book?
Yeah, I really had to, because the last one took it out of me.
Yeah.
Particularly the press. Like, I mean, I knew beforehand what it would be like, but afterwards, of course, I knew, well, anything you write in this book that is personal and shows the slightest chink in your armor is going to be the thing that gets talked about in every single interview. So I was so mindful of that, but also I felt like I had a completely different mood. Everything's going really well. I wanted to let off steam. I wanted it to be really positive. And I didn't want to be, when I wrote Women of Substances, I thought, oh, you'll position yourself in the sphere of addiction and mental health, and that's great. That could be your thing. And then I thought, no, actually, why would I want to do that? That's really difficult. So yeah, I wanted a complete change of speed.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, there was an interesting quote that you've chosen for the start of the book. I'll just read it. It's Carl Jung. And it says, how can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? And so that goes back to what we're talking before about this, the areas that you explore in this book are often things that are outside the mainstream. Did you think or read a lot about, say, Jungian psychology when you were doing this book? And kind of how aware of you when you were writing it of the shadow side? And do you think a lot of the stuff in this book, like, which is pain and extremities, represents our shadow side? And what are your thoughts on kind of integrating that side?
To be honest, I put that quote there almost as a little private message. It's not very private, but a little message to my interviewees.
Yeah.
Kind of like I see you. I mean, no, I mean, my knowledge of Jung is surface level. My feeling is that I keep thinking I should definitely be reading more, because everything I know about his work, I think, is super relevant. Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned that phrase grist for the mill right at the beginning, and yeah, so the people who I spoke to are very tuned in to the fact that they are drawing on something dark. And it was one of my interviewees, Camilla Fogagnolo, she is a power lifter and strongman athlete. And it was her who told me, I have given the subject of endurance so much thought, and I've talked about it with my trainer so much. And she told me about this 2016 study, which took super elite athletes, so like gold medalists at the Olympics, and then elite athletes who do quite well. And it was comparing the two groups, and it compared all sorts of things, but in terms of childhood, it found that the super elite group, every single one of them had some kind of traumatic childhood experience. Could be bullying, could be a bad divorce with the parents, could have been grief, you know, all sorts of things. Actually, I can think of quite a few athletes who've lost parents at a young age.
A bit like prime ministers.
Right. Okay. So I guess the difference is they found a way of channeling those hurt feelings. You know, they found somewhere to put them that was super productive. Some of them also had addiction histories, some didn't, but I find the two pathways very similar. And there's a spiritual element as well. You know, there's a spiritual transcendent element of both finding drugs and of finding some kind of sport which communicates to you on a very profound level.
What happens when, you know, we're all mortal, the body stops being able to take it at a certain point? How do these people cope when they can no longer do the extreme thing that gave them meaning and purpose?
generally really badly. So that was something we talked about. The final chapter is called The First Death, and it's from a quote by this famous ballerina and choreographer called Martha Graham. And she was talking about a ballerina dies twice, and the first time is when she has to stop dancing, and that's the more painful death. So basically everyone I interviewed has thrown everything into whatever it is they do. And sometimes they even had an alter ego, especially if they were in porn or wrestling or something. And they sacrificed a huge amount, and all their pride and reputation was tied to the thing they do. And of course, you can't do it forever. And so they fared really badly if they were injured or if something happened to make them have to retire. You know, there's so many stories in the papers, Ben Cousins being an obvious one, where people who've had that taken away from them have nothing and to these certain behavior patterns. But it means they're a really good kind of lens for us to look at our own lives. And so the final chapter looks at ways of avoiding crashing and burning during periods of transition or limbo, like a pandemic. Times where we have an identity crisis. Do you want to hear some of the solutions? We've got time.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to know what you learned from them, and yeah, the solutions would be great.
Okay. So it's good to have purpose rather than, you know, a pursuit that is 100% you. It's good to have a purpose rather than just a goal. So to find meaning in things in different ways. Psychologists, sports psychologists now, sports psychology is such an interesting field. They focus a lot on broadening who you are. So you are not just a footballer, you're also an uncle and this and that and the other. And they really try and drum that in to a lot of resistance, I'd imagine. And then there's also the idea of, if you are a very goal-oriented person, okay, you get a lot done, but there are going to be constant crashes, you know, because you're constantly aiming for something, you achieve it, and then it's got disappointment built in because now that's gone and you slump. So lots of people I interviewed, they would do their race or whatever it was, and then they would fall into binge eating or drinking or depression, unless they started planning the next thing. So it's just like this, like drug use, really. So the idea is to have activities in your life which aren't goal oriented. So they're called, philosophers of starting to, this is actually an ancient philosophical thing, but modern philosophers are starting to talk about it again. Telic activities and then atelic. So telic are goal-driven activities, and they have an endpoint, and maybe they give us a lot of meaning. And then you have atelic activities, which we do purely for enjoyment's sake. There's no heralding it on social media. There's no medal at the end of it. It could be something like, you know, gardening or a singing club or something like that. And I looked at my own life and I had nothing like that in there at all. Still don't. But then, so when I finished the book, I had an almighty crash, which I knew I would, because two things ended at once. I handed the manuscript in and I had the amateur fight. And then I was like, well, now what the hell do I do?
Now you're done.
Surely
doing all those interviews with these incredible people would have given you some insights into how they cope or how they might cope. So surely.
I mean, see, a lot of them, they're talking with bitter hindsight, aren't they?
Yeah. So this leads on to my last question, which is like, what next? What next, Jenny?
Oh, so I'm at that point now where I just throw stupid ideas at my agent. He's very patient, and eventually one sticks. But I'm not anticipating one to stick for about 6 months to a year if the past is anything to go by. You start off with just random rubbish.
No, not for a book, but in life. So are you going to more fights, or are you going to take up gardening? Like, what's the thing that you've learned that you're going to apply to your life in a practical way?
As soon as I had my fight, my interest flicked off like a switch, and I was like, no, I knew this would happen, so I'm trying to nurture that and bring it back. I think being trying not to be as all or nothing and trying to be easier on myself and allow time off, recovery time, both mentally and physically, and just allow time to go with the flow and see where things are heading rather than shoehorn my way into another mission.
I feel like this could be the next book. Thank you so much to our fantastic audience, and also to Jenny. Her book is so wonderful and interesting and intriguing, and it will take you to places you probably have never been. So I think we're going to open it up to audience questions. Yana?
Yes, we'll go to a quick Q&A. We've got one from Ruben, and he says, Jenny, in Women of Substance, Jenny talks about anhedonia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is the inability to achieve pleasure. Ruben was wondering if you broached this with anyone you interviewed for this book, whether they experienced chronic anhedonia due to their extreme lifestyles, and if yes, whether they were able to mitigate or reverse this ailment.
I didn't ask them directly, but you might assume that there is a theory of drug use that people have actually quite naturally low dopamine levels, and therefore they have to work so much harder to get some kind of a response. I definitely noticed that, like I've mentioned before, there was this kind of roller coaster of intense highs with everyone, and then these crashing lows. So yeah, it probably is very similar to anhedonia, where you are constantly trying to overcompensate. I would say that's almost definitely the case.
We've got another question from Victoria. It's more of a comment, but she's looking for just your thoughts. She says, I think we're all hard on ourselves in one way or the other. The people in your book are just at one end of the spectrum, so are not to be judged. My feeling, though, is that these hard things we do are the products of our minds, consciously or not. Our bodies, if asked, would never, ever agree to what we subject them to.
Yeah. So the title, Everything Harder Than Everyone Else, first of all, has a double meaning, because these people are generally always choosing the harder route in a kind of bloody-minded way. But yeah, I noticed that a lot of my interviewees had a really weird relationship with their body. Like, in some ways, their body was making them feel heroic. Like they might be a bodybuilder or a fighter, but they had this quite dispassionate relationship with it, where it was almost like just a meal to be driven. And yeah, one of the bodybuilders in particular, her coach was talking about her like she was a prize bull, like best in show. Well, I'll backload you with carbs, but then this is going to happen. And she'd just be nodding away. And it was like they were talking about something completely unrelated to her. So yeah, I think bar none, my interviewees all had a very complicated relationship with their body. Actually, the person who talks about that most succinctly was the ballet dancer Chloe Bayliss. And she was talking about this sense of absolute betrayal she felt from her body when it failed her. And it took her a long, long time, like decades, to have a better relationship with it.
I read a part in the book where it's almost people, bodybuilders in particular, they're obsessed with their bodies, but then at the same time, there is a bit of disregard for what they put themselves through. When you were talking about people injecting their muscles with a cocktail of I don't know what, and it would turn their muscle to rock, essentially.
Oh yeah, that's synthol, a weird thing. Yeah, and I know a few people who use performance-enhancing drugs who inject them, and they're in general, like, they're really clued up, these people, in terms of nutrition and physiology, and they know all that stuff, but they're deliberately turning a blind eye to the side effects of the drugs, which again, no judgment at all, but it's like a weird dichotomy.
Yeah, it's like they know it so well that they almost, you know the rules so you can break them, kind of.
They're not reading up on it. They're deliberately not reading up on it.
It's terrifying. And then we've got another question, which is also for Brigid. And Ruben says, as someone who has decided to pursue writing as a serious endeavor during a global pandemic, no less, I've come to understand that you've got to be a sucker for punishment. As writers, would both Jenny and Brigid agree that writing qualifies as an extreme endeavour?
That's a really, it's a very astute point. I don't think writing is extreme. I think it's necessary, particularly during a pandemic. So in order to understand what we're going through and to also record it just for future generations, we need to write. So it becomes not some sort of activity that is seen as a risk, but it's something that is essential to be able to make sense of the world. I guess the element though is making money, you know, like turning something that's essential into an activity that can financially sustain you. And I think that's where it's tricky. But look, Australians are great readers. Like our publishing industry is really healthy. People are buying books. People are coming to events like this. Both Jen and I work for The Guardian, you know, so the Guardian's enjoying like record traffic. So I think it can feel extreme at low moments, but I also think it feels nourishing and essential at times like these. What are your thoughts, Jenny?
It has been really interesting now that I'm in a more sporty world, whereas before I was totally in arts and music world. The responses of people when they ask me questions about things like wages and time and effort, like, well, mainly wages and how you make a living. There's this assumption that you know, you're really successful. And when I talk to people who are more in sort of sports world, and I hear myself talking out loud about what my job is like and what surviving all that is like, it sounds completely fucking crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you want to write a book then? Because of course you do. That is the thing you want to do. Everyone wants to write a book.
I think like if you didn't write the book, we wouldn't know about these people. Like I don't watch the sort of porn that's in this book, and I'm like now reading about it going, oh wow, there's like this whole world of people getting off on people vomiting. Like it's insane.
I'm so much more enriched for knowing that.
But you know, that's the kind of,
it's nice to know that there are hidden worlds out there beyond your own bubble.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to go, oh wow, that's going on over there, and look how involved it is, and I had no idea. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah, not knowing what's happening on the internet, or even you talked about, I think the dungeon you said is in Oakley South, which is where my grandmother lives.
Yeah, it's one of those
a sex dungeon out there. It's very interesting. Victoria said, I'm doing a PhD at the moment, definitely an extreme. So I can see how there are parts of writing, especially Jenny with your last book, where it is very introspective, where that can be extreme in a way, how deep you have to go with some things as well. And you can get quite lost in your own writing.
Yeah, I mean, I follow a lot of academics on Twitter, and it's like Twitter's like one massive support group for people doing PhDs. Really, it seems like that to me anyway. It's huge. You're carrying around a vast universe in your head if you're doing a PhD, and nobody really knows. I mean, they know you're doing one, but they can't possibly fathom what you're carrying around. So yeah, kudos.
Yeah. That's all we've got from the audience tonight, but I would like to know more about the conversation between you and Brigid about her having to talk you out of waterboarding. Did you say, hey, I'm doing this? Yes. Or do you say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the same afternoon I've been put to sleep by a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but I was thinking, how do I start the book? And I said, I've got an idea. There's somebody who would probably do this. And I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to or not. And Brigid was saying it would probably be one, quite disrespectful to people who have not done this willingly. And fair point. And also, it's a bit try hard, isn't it?
Yeah, Christopher Hitchens did a waterboarding story for Vanity Fair where someone waterboarded him, and like, you know, these pretend CIA ops kidnapped him, and it was a fantastic piece back in 2003 or whenever it came out, but I just thought Jenny, A, I didn't want Jenny to die, and B, I thought it had already been done.
But also his was more in context and respectful, and within a larger context of why that happens to people in the world, whereas mine was not. So yeah, it would have been terrible.
But then you went off and had sex with some, not sex, you had an experience with BDSM, which is kind of, for some people, would be more terrifying than waterboarding.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's as pedestrian as you want it to be. It was more like, if I'm going to interview this guy, I might as well while I'm here.
Yeah. And have your subjects read the book, and have you had some responses from them?
The Australian ones have, and I think they really like it. It's always really nerve-wracking writing about somebody else, particularly when you've got a bigger picture in your mind. So they're just one part of it. Then you think, even though I've read this bit over and over again to make sure it's respectful, maybe they're like, but you didn't put this part of my story in, or that time I won that belt, and you can never kind of give people what they want. But yeah, so far the response has been really good, and people have been sharing it, people that I interviewed on Instagram and stuff. It's really, really nice.
And do you feel weird? I mean, do you feel like you've left this world, or do you feel like you're still in it? Or is it you've done the book and now you're kind of moving out of this world of extremes?
No, I'm definitely feeling like I'm still in it. If I could stay in it longer, I would, like under some ruse, I would. So I might. I was thinking of a book on steroids and performance enhancing drugs, but there might be a more limited audience for that. Of course, your job is to make it interesting to everyone.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating underworld and a fascinating whole network. So like we were talking about other realities that exist that we don't really know about. It's fascinating.
Well, that's where all the books start, with fascination. Staying up late at night Googling steroids.
Where to?
All right, so I think we will finish up. That's all the questions from the audience tonight. Jenny, did you have any finishing words you'd like to say?
No, honestly, Brigid did a wonderful job and covered it so well. And thank you to you and Avid Reader for hosting.
Buy the book.
Yes. And usually, while I would say to purchase this book through Avid Reader, we'd actually like to ask everyone in the audience tonight to please support your local Victorian bookseller as they work through an extended lockdown. I'm just going to link in the chat now the Booksellers Association, where you'll be able to find a Victorian bookseller where you can purchase Jenny's book.
That's so nice.
Yes, very important to support all of Australia's book industry as well.
Yeah.
So yes, purchase it at Avid, or purchase at your local Victorian bookseller as well. I've linked it in there. You will be able to find it, someone close to you, or they will also deliver online. So I would just like to say thank you so much, Jenny and Brigid. This has been such a fascinating discussion. I'm only partway through the book, but it is so incredible. And that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you everyone for joining us on a Friday night, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
You. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.